Hi guys, it's Kamil here, and it's another international book review. Book number 5, The Eighth Life by Nino Haratischwili. This book was published originally in Germany in 2014. In 2016-2017 it was already a big hit in Poland, where I live. However, because of the advertising, 6 romances, 1 revolution, the story of the century, and Polish advertising was quite similar, it didn't strike me like a novel I would normally be interested in. And I needed International Booker Prize to pick it up and read it. Yeah. Also, 1 revolution bit is a bit incorrect. This novel and Yoko Ogawa's The Memory Police were probably the safest bets for the longlist, both already widely discussed before International Booker Longlist was announced. The Eighth Life was an international best-selling novel, so when it finally arrived into an English-speaking hemisphere, nothing else was expected but for it to be a hit. I can understand the wide appeal of this novel. You know, when it crosses generations to tell this fascinating but yet relatable family story in this bloody violent 20th century, it reads a bit like an Eastern European War and Peace, mixed a tiny bit with 100 Years of Solitude. It's set in exotic enough for many Europeans Georgia, who still is culturally European enough to be easily understandable. Additionally, the main characters are vivid, strong-headed, full of emotions women trying to find their footing in the sweeping blood left and right 20th century. Who wouldn't like to read that? But let's start from the beginning. The novel starts in Berlin when we meet the narrator Nisayashi, Georgian emigrant to Germany in her 30s. She is being interrupted by her mother calling to ask Nisa to pick up her niece, Brilka. Brilka is the daughter of Nisa's sister, Daria. She is a 12-year-old girl who, after arriving in Amsterdam with her Georgian dance troupe, runs away and is now on her way to Vienna. This is where Nisa begins the story of the Yashi family, taking the reader back to the beginning of 20th century, to a provincial Georgian town and to a family of a master chocolatier, the owner of a secret hot chocolate recipe, which brings an ecstasy of senses. However, the ecstasy that recipe brings demands a high payment in return. Everyone that tries the recipe in its pure form is doomed by a curse. And that's how the generations of this middle upper-class family are affected. Like in Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, where the novel depicts 7 generations, Nino Haratischwili depicts 7 lives affected by the curse. The first carrier of the curse is Stasia Yashi, the oldest daughter of the master. We look at close to 100 years of Eastern European history through her life, her sister's Christine's life, Stasia's son Kostya and daughter Kitty's life, Kostya's daughter Elene's lives, and then Elene's daughter's life, Daria and Nisa. And finally, the 8th life that we are not shown as the chapter is left open is Daria's daughter, Brilka, to whom this novel is dedicated. Georgia, once a strong Roman and Byzantine cultural center on the Caucasus, a powerhouse in the Middle Ages, soon became a Christian enclave surrounded by Turkish and Iranian states, until it unified with Russia at the beginning of 19th century, and after a short period of independence from Russia 1918-1921 became part of Soviet Union in 1921 due to Red Army invasion. Georgia, which is also quite clearly stated in this book, had always quite a special place in the Soviet Union. It was a country of birth of Joseph Stalin and many Soviet strongmen, like Lavrentiy Beria, for instance. Quite notorious character of this novel, named here as a little big man. There's a great political commentary from Kostya, the most developed male character in the novel and also the most unlikable character period in the novel, who explains to Niza the difference between Polish and Baltic states' fight for independence from communism and Georgian. And the difference lays in geographical location, obviously. You know, states are victims of its geography, and there's almost no way of escaping that. I believe the strongest element of this novel is its historical scope, brilliantly and quite effortlessly woven into the story of this family. I was reading it and was quite delighted, thinking that there's finally a novel showcasing a bloody century of Eastern Europe and Eastern European families. For Western Europe, the bloodshed of the 20th century ended with the Second World War. Right? For Eastern Europe, it was 1989 or 1990, depending on the country, or even later. It was quite emotional to read about Yashi's family while at the same time seeing my family history reflected in some of those events I was reading about. That's why when I was writing about it on my Instagram, I said that this novel is not only Georgian, but it's a novel that is Eastern European at its core. Each chapter of the novel is marked with an epigraph from historical figures, be it writers or politicians like Stalin. And at the beginning, I have to admit, I was more interested in them and how they play against the plot of a given chapter than the novel itself. It changed though, don't worry. Another strong element of this novel is Nino Haratischwili's ability to create beautiful scenes. This novel is wild in terms of its vivid, dark, crossing but never too much the barrier of reality images. Like this one, for instance. The world was dancing in circles. The skeletons beneath the earth beat time. Roses no longer bloomed in any color but black. Old paths felt like rope bridges, swaying, ready to collapse at any moment. Even the snow acquired bluish tinge. The sky was peppered with holes. You could see bullet holes on the horizon too. And although the sun shone wearily down, it could no longer impart any warmth. The trees came to the whispered agreement and hung themselves on one another's branches. Birds fell from the sky, because at the sight of the dance they forgot how to fly. Children became adults overnight and polished grenades. Tears became rare, expensive things. Only grimaces were free. However, the writing of the novel is affected by its format. This is a novel that is sort of a letter of the narrator Niza to her niece Brilka, recapturing the life of the family. Therefore, everything you read in this novel is told. Everything is explained to you, to the point of the paragraphs analyzing internal motives, feelings, and thoughts of the characters. I prefer when the writer shows me the character, and I rather do the analysis myself, but here there's no chance for that. But that is the format author chosen, and due to that it's hard to hold it against it. The overarching theme of the novel is a repetition of history. Like in Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, where the novel depicts 7 generations of Buendia family, here Nino Haratischwili depicts 7 lives. The life of Stasia, Christine, Kostya, Kitty, Ellen, Daria, and Niza, as I already said. I believe that the first half of the novel, depicting the lives of Stasia, Christine, Kostya, and Kitty, is significantly betterly constructed and more modern part of Elena, Daria, and Niza. The first 4 chapters are dedicated to individualized characters with their own distinctive voices, distinctive characteristics. And even if the sense of doom is never leaving those pages, as a reader I was able to comprehend, maybe not sympathize, but comprehend the decisions of all of them. While the last 3, especially Elena and Daria, in their autodestructive reasoning patterns, felt a bit like made out of the same form. And I probably could live with that due to the overarching theme of the inevitable and inescapable repetition of history, but the autodestructive tendencies were especially puzzling in Daria and Ellen, when those characters were the ones that lived in the most comfortable circumstances, both materially and emotionally. In the novel that is essentially historical one and rather realistic in terms of the spectrum the characters base their decisions on, I mean, despite the background bringing magic in, like magical recipe or a paragraph I just read, in this type of a historical novel, I would want to understand the characters' behaviors, and I didn't understand Elena and Daria. Most of the time when I was reading about Elena's thoughts and rationalizations, I was so lost seeing this over-dramatization and over-the-top reasoning that I was really thinking, just please stop, just stop. There was nothing in the life of Loft spoiled even, and given all one could dream girl that would justify her transition into this sulky and miserable person. So much of it was self-imposed. I mean, and I know, one can self-impose it, but I really don't understand how somebody living her life can end up like that and then turn to almost perfectly normal mother. My patience was also tested with Daria chapter, but I'm leaving it for you to read. The theme of history repeating itself is very visible also in the motif of beauty is a wound or beauty is a curse. This theme is a driving force in the lives of almost all female characters. I wasn't a huge fan of it either when it was played out again and again. Another aspect of this novel that there's no running away from is its size, right? However, in contrast to other many hundred pages novels, I didn't really catch myself thinking the last 10 pages should have been edited out as they bring nothing to the story. Actually, I felt all those pages were justified, and that's a huge compliment, I believe. Nino Haratischwili uses the symbolism of a carpet, the symbol of the region, to tell the story of the Yashi family. There are multiple knots, threads, leading in various directions, then meeting together. Those knots, those threads, introduce multiple supporting characters and their stories. And I didn't mind that at all. I didn't mind that multitudes of characters, multitudes of stories. I admired and appreciated them. Even the fact that almost all of them eventually are dark and sinister didn't bother me. However, due to the reasons I already talked about, I read the last 400 pages with less pleasure than the first 500 that I actually loved. The novel ends with another demonstration on the streets of Tbilisi of 2007. Exactly the repetition of the scene that took place a couple of dozen of pages earlier. But that's not a criticism, there's a reason for that. And the final chapter, dedicated to the life of Brilka, is nothing more than a blank page, symbolizing the possibility of breaking the repetition pattern, the repetition of the doomed history maybe, once and for all maybe. I have spent 6 evenings reading this book and then more time than usual thinking about this review and then writing it. And then I realized that the fact that it took me so much time to get my head around it, because I loved and admired so much about it, but in the same time wasn't on board with a lot of it, speaks quite clearly that it's a very uneven book for me. The one that I will continue praising for its language, historical background, masterfully used, the role it might play in bringing Eastern European history to the wider audience, some brilliant characters, and then criticize for the second half of it when I was lost in understanding the development of younger generation characters. The indistinguishability of psychological spectrum of some of them. Okay guys, let me know what have you thought about it if you read it. Who was your favorite character? Mine was definitely Christine, and of course Ida, but she wasn't the main one. And then I'll talk to you soon. I'll be back with my next review, and it's still by Daniel Kelman that I have on my shelf back then, so I'm not going to run for it. Okay guys, have a brilliant week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.